Well, you are with me at PhD Science. I am your facilitator for today, Tamaya McAfee, and just a little bit about me. I have 16 years of experience in education in Beaumont ISD, Fort Bend ISD, and as well as here in Houston ISD. Graduated from Lamar University. I hold my principal certification, and then my background is mainly 4th through 8th math and science, as well as my ESL supplemental. So just because it's just you and I today, feel free, if there's any questions that you have, stop me along the way. Some of our community agreements that we would like is for you to be fully engaged, share your best thinking, it's one-on-one. So please, no question is too small. Make sure that you ask any questions that you have. And then take care of your personal needs. The closest restroom is going to be down this hall on the right. And then of course, have fun and enjoy the session. All right, so some of our environmental norms, we're going to have a few breaks within our session today. So just make sure that when we do release for breaks, we're punctual and we're actively listening and participating, and then of course, asking any clarifying questions that you may have. So throughout our slide today, we will be heavily engaged in our participant guide. So if you see this icon throughout our slides, it's just giving you an indicator that we're going to reference the participant guide to make sure that we're annotating and recording when needed. We will have some other opportunities to engage in some of our engagement strategies as well. Okay. And so here to my left, we have a parking lot. So if there's any questions that you may have, feel free to record your questions on a sticky note, or you can answer or ask them freely, and I will answer them at your discretion. So if I can have you just read through our session objectives for today, we're going to highlight these 3 main areas as it relates to being able to implement PhD science within our campuses.
Okay, PhD science curriculum, resources, and materials. Develop an understanding of the PhD science learning approach. Prepare for campus implementation by developing actionable plans for internalization and customization.
So what we're going to do is we're going to explore the resources, and then we're going to take a deep dive of what internalization looks like from the lens of a teacher as well as a leader as you facilitate PLCs. So before we dive into the curriculum resources, we want to just talk about the word phenomenon, because as we are introducing new standards this year to our teachers, it is really going to be based off of phenomenon experiences and phenomenon-based learning. So I just want you to think about this question and identify, what does it mean to integrate phenomenon into your instruction? Just a thinking question. So as we go through our slide today, I do want to have an opportunity for us to come back and respond to this question. So you don't have to answer it right now. Just food for thought. Okay. Inside your toolkit, there are some sticky notes. And what I want us to do is we are going to engage in a KWL chart. And so I have my chart presented over here to my right. And I want you to think about phenomenon-based teaching and learning. And I want you to write down anything that you know about phenomenon-based teaching and learning. Create your own definition. What does that mean to you? And then what do you want to know? And then at the end of our session, as we reflect, we're going to think about what you learned about phenomenon-based teaching and instruction. And then feel free to engage with your sticky notes, and then I'll give you a few minutes to think about that as we share out. All right, so we are approaching our end time. And I just want to see if we have any volunteers who would like to share what you know or what you would like to know.
What I know is just incorporating real world experiences or information within a lesson. And then what I want to know, like I stated earlier, like how to implement it so that K-5 has that lift and that helping with that level of learning science and making sure the students learn it. Perfect. Gets it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I'll take your sticky note and I'll put it on the KWL chart. Thank you.
I'll say the same thing that she did is experience-based learning. Mm-hmm. And then my want to know is how to better use it with the NES lessons.
Okay. And so both of your campuses are NES?
No, mine is.
No. What campus are you?
Blackshear.
Okay, well, welcome. And so what we will talk about is how phenomenon-based learning is going to be embedded with your resources that you have. And so we will take a deeper dive into what that looks like. Okay. All right, thank you so much for your feedback. And we're going to reflect back on these questions at the end of our session. Okay, so what we're going to do is take a look at a video to kind of better understand what phenomenon is. And we're going to stamp the formal definition of what phenomenon learning is as we continue in with our session. So I have a quick video that I would like for us to take a few seconds to just explore, and then we'll have some thoughts at the end.
A rising moon, a setting sun, a spider spinning its web, an ice sheet collapsing, a rover landing on Mars. We see these things, and we're filled with wonder. They're all examples of phenomena. Phenomena, observable events that occur in a natural or designed system. Events that we can explain with science. Phenomena inspire curiosity. Twig science.
Okay, so hopefully by looking at that, it puts it in perspective that anything really could be a phenomenon. It doesn't have to be such a magnificent event that takes place. We can use everyday items as a phenomenon. Usually it's an event that can be observed, and students can have explanations or questionings strategies in order to stamp or solidify what the phenomenon experience is. And so as we go through today with PhD science, a lot of the phenomenon experiences that students will be able to have is going to be in terms of just the natural world around us. How did the Grand Canyon form? What caused this shift to take place in order for us to see this observable event that happened? And so what we want to just understand is that it doesn't have to be this magnificent ordeal in order for a phenomenon experience to take place for students. So the formal definition that we have here is presented on the screen. Do I have a volunteer to read it for us?
A phenomenon is an observable event that can be explained through scientific understanding.
Thank you so much. And so feel free to annotate the formal definition in your participant guide. You should see a Venn diagram that is on the right, and there's some open space on the left where you can record your definition. Now, we do have a new TEKS training that will take place tomorrow morning, and it really goes into what phenomenon experiences are for students. And then we will see how that is embedded within our side-by-side Region 4 standards, and we will kind of extract some of those terms along the way out so we can really get a true understanding of what phenomenon looks like in the K-5 sector. So when we talk about the transitions to new TEKS, we can't talk about phenomenon without talking about how the standards are changing and shifting. So this is just a snapshot, a preview to the session that will take place solely over new TEKS. But one thing we do want to make sure that we understand is that the new science standards are coming into the framework of three major components. One is going to be the SEPs or SEPs, which is your science engineering practices. And oftentimes, when we reflect back on the previous standards, it's going to be very similar to your process skills and process standards that teachers have already been embedding within the curriculum. So that's just being able to communicate, identify, analyze data, communicate results, being able to articulate and share their findings with other counterparts. When we talk about reoccurring themes and concepts, this is the new portion that is part of our standards. So this is kind of like the why. So we have 7 reoccurring themes, and we're going to be able to teach this science content in 7 different ways, whether we're presenting patterns to students, whether we're presenting scale, the flow of energy. So as students are learning about the content, they're able to connect it with 7 of these reoccurring themes. And then the last component of our new shift in standards is going to be the DCI. That's disciplinary core ideas, also referred to as our standards. And so when we put or merge all 3 areas of these new frameworks together, we see that in the middle is where we get the 3D learning, which is the phenomenon-based experience. The phenomenon-based experience will not take place if we do not have these three components embedded within our resources, embedded within our classroom discussion, within how we're presenting materials to students. We have to make sure that all three areas are successfully covered in order for that phenomenon experience to take place for students. So that 3D framework, as you're recording that, just know that that's the phenomenon experience for students. So what is PhD science? How many people are familiar with PhD science? Thumbs up, you rocking and rolling, thumbs down or side? Okay, side by side. So what I do want to make mention of is that PhD science, if you utilize the slide decks in K through 4 last year, it was solely off of PhD science. So you have a preview of what that looked like from day to day if you utilize those resources. So I do want us to take a deep dive of what PhD science is. We're going to talk about just the overall structure, the resources that are available for campuses, and then also what's also available for purchasing for campus leaders as well, just to consider that. So what I want us to do is take a look at what PhD science is. We're going to go to the main platform and just get an overview of what the program entails. And so as I show this to you, I do want you to just have some guiding questions in your mind of anything that you will that sticks out to you that you would like to share out as it relates to the video.
Created by teachers for teachers. Like you, we want to inspire students to wonder about the world and empower them to make sense of it. PhD Science Texas is a level K through 5 science curriculum that is driven by authentic phenomena. At its core, PhD Science Texas is knowledge building, rigorously engaging, and coherent. Let's begin with some basics. Each level has 3 modules, and each module focuses on a different topic. These topics build students' knowledge about life science, earth and space science, and physical science. Some PhD Science Texas modules have spotlight lessons that appear after the module in the teacher edition. Spotlight lessons have fewer lessons than a full module and highlight particular TEAC standards. For example, in Level 3, students explore full modules on earth changes, survival and change, and forces in motion. Students also explore spotlight lessons on changes in matter and the solar system. Each module has 25 to 35 lessons, including spotlight lessons. There are approximately 120 lessons in a school year. In levels K through 2, each lesson is 35 minutes long. In levels 3 through 5, each lesson is 45 minutes long. Let's look at the components of each PhD Science Texas module. The teacher edition is your guide. You can use either a print teacher edition or access the teacher edition through the Great Minds digital platform. Each student has their own print science logbook. Hard copies of student assessments and resources are available in assessment packs and student science packs. Materials kits include most of the materials you will need for the module's investigations. Core texts have been carefully selected to support each module's anchor phenomenon and provide students with additional literacy practice. Knowledge deck posters and cards use engaging images and informational text to help students in levels K through 2 build knowledge related to the module's content. You can access your module's implementation guide, resources such as digital assessments and lesson slides, planning support documents, and much more on the Great Minds digital platform. Now that you've had a brief introduction to PhD Science Texas, here are some next steps you might take. You may want to explore more resources on our website, texas.greatminds.org/science. You can begin exploring right after you finish watching this welcome video. We also offer a host of professional learning sessions that strengthen implementation.
All right, so what I wanted to do is just have an opportunity for you to just get the big picture framework. That was a lot of information to share, but I'm going to dissect each component of what was referenced in the video a little bit more in specifics, especially if you have questions along the way. So what I want us to do is just to kind of think about any major takeaways that you possibly had from the video. So it was just a preview, an overview. Was there anything that really stuck out to you? Any questions that you may have leading into the next component? If not, don't worry. We will have probably some questions as we start diving into the components of the module. But I'll give you just some thinking time to see if there was any key takeaways that you've had from the the overview video. All right, so when we think about PhD science, we really think about coherence. And so this is just a focus question I want you to think to yourself is, what does coherence mean within HISD? And even more particular, what does coherence mean for your campus? What does it look like from day to day with your science instruction? Is there coherence with planning with teachers? Is there coherence within the daily schedule? I just want you to kind of brainstorm on how coherence is for your individual campus, because then we're going to talk about the importance of building coherence within PhD science, because that is the framework of this particular platform. They're built on coherence, rigorous engagement, and knowledge. And so as you think about what that looks like for your campus, I do want to break down the structure of PhD a little bit more. You're going to see that coherence is developed not only within the modules, but you also will see it from grade level to grade level. So as we start with PhD science in our lower grades, such as kinder, and we build our way up to 5th grade, there's going to be areas where students will be able to reflect back and say, oh, I remember learning about the Surtsey Island in 3rd grade. And now I'm in 4th grade, so they're able to reflect back on specific phenomenon experiences that they were able to witness in their previous grade. So what we want to make sure that we're doing is we're providing an opportunity for students to see this resource in all grade levels so that when they are progressing, it allows teachers an opportunity to scaffold the information just a little bit better because they have the prior knowledge to activate for students. The other part that you're going to see is that not only is it going to be coherence from K to 5, but it's also going to shift within the modules. Most grade levels will have 3 to 4 modules. Today, we're going to build our framework from 3rd grade, and 3rd grade has 3 modules in particular. And as I look from module 1, 2, and 3, we're going to see that there's going to be some conversation pieces that show the coherence or the connection from module to module. And then more specific within modules, we have our concepts. And our concepts will be pretty much, and I'll dive a little bit deeper into the module has an anchoring phenomenon, which is a big umbrella of a question that students are going to ask and answer at the end of that particular module. And the goal of the concept is for students to work towards answering that module question. And we know that if we have 3 modules, that question that they have as the anchoring phenomenon, which is the module question, is going to be a heavy question for students to answer. So we know that they cannot answer it on day 1. So our goal is to work through these lessons, work through these concepts so that by the end of the module, they'll have enough evidence to support that question. So what we're going to do is we're going to share out in your table folders, you do have a Ziploc bag. And since we're referencing the importance of coherence, we're also going to reference the importance of the learning progression to build coherence. So inside your Ziploc bag, there is a card sort. And what I would like for us to do is just kind of explore this particular standard. And it ranges, and I won't say you have all grade levels, but it ranges from K to 7th grade. Okay, so you won't have every single grade level from K to 7th grade, but just know that you're going to have predominantly elementary standards and then 1 secondary standard that's in there. But you're going to see how the learning progression of this particular standard is going to evolve and understand the importance of building the coherence within our PhD science resources to support this standard along the way.
To organize it according to increasing standard?
Correct.
Okay.
Increasing standards, starting with your lowest standard, which will start at 1st grade. All right, have y'all locked in? No, it's okay, it's okay. We're gonna just talk about it, and our goal really is just to be able to see how our standard progresses, and then also making sure that we are kind of keeping in the forefront how coherence within our lessons should progress as well. And so as we think about, now it's time for us to check our responses. And I heard some great discussion about slow and rapid. We're going to talk about what grade level in particular that is. Our 1st grade standard is going to be the one that says investigate and describe how water can move rock and soil, particles from one place to another. And then when we go from 1st grade to 2nd grade, the only aspect that we're really focusing here on is we're adding another component. Okay, so we went from water in first grade. Now we really want to hone in on wind and water. Yeah. And third grade is where students are going to learn about rapid changes. They'll be able to make observation about rapid changes such as your volcanic eruptions, your earthquakes. And once they understand the process of these rapid changes, now we can go into our slow changes in fourth grade. In fifth grade, we're now introducing our variables here, our components of understanding how wind, water, and ice form. And then we have to be very specific on these landforms that students have to know, which is your canyons, your sand dunes, and your deltas in fifth grade. And then we're jumping into seventh grade where we're honing in on plate tectonics, which is going to be a new phenomenon for students as well when they go into the higher grades. So just knowing that the vertical alignment for this standard is something that PhD science speaks to as they build coherence from one module to the next. And so by the time they get into their upper grades, they've already had such a good foundation of looking at those experiences along the way. Did you have any questions? All right, so I'm going to give you just a few minutes to place those card sorts back, and we're going to dive into some of the resources that were mentioned in the overview video. And so earlier I talked about some of those resources will be campus funding, like you would have to purchase anything in addition to what is already being presented to the district. So I'll kind of highlight those areas as well. So we have 4 main resources that we're going to walk through today, which is your student logbook, your material kits, your knowledge deck cards, and your complex trade books. Those are the 4 main resources that teachers can leverage to be successful within their implementation of PhD science. The very first one is already presented to you all in the digital form, so there's no additional requirements. Once you have access to the digital platform, there is going to be a student logbook. It's kind of like their journal where they're annotating and responding to either questions that are posed from the teacher during your lesson, annotating illustrations, building models. This is where they're going to be able to record those resources or that information using the student logbook. And this is only going to be presented in digital form. And so this is really the #1 resource that students need in order to engage in the lesson. And so when the teachers are annotating their lesson plan or internalizing the lesson, they're going to have hyperlinks where they're able to click on it and access the student sheet during their planning time. So therefore, when the notes will say reference activity guide A or B, teachers will have access to this particular document. The material kits. Okay. The material kits are something that would be an added on. We do have a few kits still left and available. So if you are in need of kits, we have 3rd and 4th grade that we can possibly definitely support and deliver to your campuses. 3rd and 4th. So I'll make sure I get your information and we will see if there's a way that we can get the logistics of either getting them delivered or picked up, either or. But we have those kits only for those 2 grade levels. And so anything outside of 3rd and 4th will be a campus purchase. And so what takes place in the material kits is very identified here, where it's just a hands-on activity. It's the investigation that's the teacher's referencing. And then you have your knowledge deck cards. These are very similar to just your flashcards, right? So you have an image in the front and then you have some informational text on the back. This one right here is only available in grades K through 2, and it is presented as a print resource. So this is something that's not included in the digital format. All right, so your complex trade books are not PhD science specific. These complex trade books are just additional literary texts that can be referenced as the teacher is presenting lessons to students. So this, you may say, well, how do I find these books? These books could be found in your local library. They can be found as audiobooks on YouTube. Those would probably be the 2 main locations. If teachers want to purchase it on their own on Amazon, you could do that as well. But they're not solely PhD specific books. Throughout the module, they will reference some of these literary texts just for additional support in their learning. So what I'm going to do is we're going to transition into the platform, and this is just for me to give you a preview, because I will have you spend about 20 minutes to navigate the platform on your own for you to get a little bit more familiar with it. But I do just want to kind of front load some of the information that you're going to find on the platform before you dive a little bit deeper into it on your own. Okay, so as of now, we're working in the demo account until everything gets synced over into Clever. So before I have you log in, just make sure that you're logged out of everything that is Clever based, just because if you are not, you're going to be synced into the old PhD Science, and they've made updates over the summer. So we just want to make sure that you're looking at the new platform along the way. So for today's purposes, I'm going to give you the demo account for PhD Science for you to navigate. Okay, so for today, I am going to just kind of highlight third grade. And so one thing that you're going to see within the platform is your toolbar here, where it identifies your level and your module. So PhD Science referenced the levels as grades. So level 3 would be grade 3. And then if you do your drop down, you'll see all the other grade levels here. And so because we're looking at level 3, you see that there's going to be 3 modules as well. Most of your grade levels will have 3, possibly 4 modules, but it's pretty consistent with 3 modules for all grade levels. When you go to the very top part, these 2 icons are probably going to be the best starting spot for you. This one gives you an overview. Let me go back real quick. This one right here gives you an overview of the whole grade level. So because it says level 3 overview, this is giving you just the big picture of what grade 3 entails. So as I select grade 3 or level 3, you're going to see some of the major components. As I scroll down, you'll see the curriculum map, the content standards, your science engineering practices, which is also going into your new TEKS and your framework that way as well. Your reoccurring themes, and so forth. That's one way you can do it. You can also just go ahead and scroll over from left to right using your toolbar at the top, and it gives you a snapshot of where everything is provided. This would probably be the best location to find the materials that you need for the whole module. So right here where it says material list, it gives you what you need for that grade level. You also have your pacing calendar and then any other preparation resources available for you as well. Everything is going to be downloadable, and you will be able to either preview it, selecting the eyes, or you can download it as it relates to your preparation guide for each of the individual module. So if you want to do it bite-sized and say, okay, well, I know that module 1 may take me all the way up till Thanksgiving, then I just want to kind of hone in on what module 1 preparation guide and the material list, and just kind of front load all of those resources ahead of time before you get into your implementation of that particular module. So this is going to be just the level 3 overview. It gives you a good synopsis of what takes place within that grade level. The implementation resources is going to be where the implementation guide is. And so as leaders, I would recommend that you partner with your teachers to really extract some of the useful information from the implementation guide. It's a bundle of about 145 pages, but I'm going to speak to maybe the last 40 pages that are going to be very beneficial to you as it relates to just classroom instruction. So I will highlight this, but it really gives you a snapshot of how to implement the resource a little bit more effectively. So this is everything dealing with the grade level as a whole is outside the module. When you come down here, you're going to see that you have 3 illustrations that represent module 1, 2, and 3. When you select your first module, it gives you an overview of just this module, module 1. This is where teachers should start because this is where we're going to internalize the module. And remember, we will have an opportunity to break down this module a little bit more. We will see that there's an anchoring phenomenon, which is the big picture. And throughout these lessons, it's the goal of the teacher and the responsibility of students to be able to answer this question at the end of the module. Okay, that's the goal. But every day they have their own question that they're answering. And the idea is to have those questions give them enough evidence for when the module concludes. Let's say it concludes at Thanksgiving, around Thanksgiving time, they have enough support and background knowledge to answer this overall module's question. And so we see here that the anchoring phenomenon is, how can the island of Surtsey change shape over time? Okay. But this is a starting point before you start any module. And remember, in third grade, there's only 3 modules, so they need to just do this 3 times a year, ideally. But of course, we can always reflect back and extract information along the way. Yes. And I'm going to show you where that would be housed. Okay. So this is the module overview and the module map. And this is where we're going to do most of our work today, is kind of backwards planning, right? So we're just looking at the big picture and working our way down to scale to hone in on the specifics. Okay. And as you go or scroll down or go across, you'll see that your module includes your focus standard, what standards are we addressing, some background information to build on teacher knowledge, content-based, key terms, and then of course, advanced preparation. This is really helpful because there's going to be some things that teachers need to plan for before they get to that lesson. Like for instance, if we're looking at seeds, because we're talking about the germination of flowers, we know that, this might be an advanced preparation where I need to plant some of these seeds so that 2 weeks from now, I'm already ready to discuss this lesson. So this is something that teachers should definitely recommend. I recommend all teachers to go here first, so that Monday morning they're not scrambling around to see, I forgot to set this up last week. So we can do this ahead of time, looking at the module map and identifying what are some advanced preparation that teachers could do before they get to that lesson. And it tells you how many days in advance. So you need to make sure that you have your soil columns 3 to 4 days before the lesson is even getting ready to be launched for students. So that was the overview, and it's found right here. Now we're going to take a look at the lesson. I'm going to click this arrow, and we're going to see how it's broken up into lesson 1 and lesson 2. Okay. Before we get to lesson 1 and lesson 2, the prepare section is going to be some information that will be helpful to look at lessons clustered together. So instead of looking at lesson 1 and 2 individually, I want to look at big picture because I'm going from module to the lesson set. So now here, I'm going to just kind of get an overview of what these 2 lessons entail, because I know that they're going to have a focus question and a phenomenon question, and they should tie to each other. So if I look at the big picture of these 2 lesson sets, I can kind of get an overview of where I'm going with the students. What is the end goal within those 2 lessons? And as I go through it, I can see the same concepts a little bit more specific. What are my standards, my materials, and resources that I'll need for those 2 lessons bundled together? Once I identify my lesson set, then I can go back and look at my individual lessons. So here's lesson 1 and then lesson 2. And to answer your question earlier, you will have your phenomenon question and your daily agenda all presented here. Okay. And so within your lesson, you see that it's broken down with time, allotted timestamps for each of the components. Your lesson is going to have 3 sections, which is your launch, your learn, and your land. And that is kind of the framework, very similar if I was to connect it to your 5 E's. Your launch is going to be the engagement, right? How am I engaging students? What hook am I bringing in to really have students activate their prior knowledge? The learn section is going to be the heart of the lesson. It's going to be like where students are exploring and where teachers are stamping the learning in the explain. So that is going to be where majority of the time is going to be found, is during the learn section. And then the land is really how we're evaluating the students. So this was just a preview. This is just a preview of just how the platform is laid out. Specific areas that are solely for PhD science, the terminology behind it, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into how to internalize a module. But I did want to just select some of the highest leverage components of where we're going to be at today. So this is just a preview of our learning. And so now we're going to transition into understanding just the deep structure of PhD science. So how can we get a deep understanding of PhD science Texas structure? And so now we're going to dive into the components of what PhD science looks like as it relates to the big picture, going to more specifics. So we know we have our grade level, and the grade level is going to be divided into 3 specific modules. And this is all from the lens of 3rd grade, okay? So as you explore the platform on your own, you'll see that the framework is very similar in all grade levels. Within a module, it breaks down into concepts, okay? And so keep in mind, 3 modules will cover us from August all the way to May. So these modules are fairly lengthy. So keep in mind, when we look at one module in particular, there's several lessons that are going to take place within that module. If you notice on the far right and left, there's some spotlight lessons. These spotlight lessons do not need to be skipped. In fact, they need to be taught with fidelity because these are going to be some standards that are going to be tied in, specifically found only in the spotlight lessons. Okay, so we'll talk about how a spotlight lesson looks in 3rd grade so you can kind of get familiar with what it entails. And then, of course, we break it down into our lesson set and our lesson. The only difference between our lesson set and our lesson is that this represents a cluster of lessons. So if I'm saying, okay, I want a lesson plan or internalize my lesson for the week, I'm going to first start with my lesson set because it clusters several lessons together. So now I'm looking at lessons 1 through 3 and just kind of getting a big picture of what that looks like. And now in specifics, now that I have an overview of the 3 lessons, let's break it down day by day. So what does lesson 1 say? What does lesson 2 say? And so forth. And so as we think about our breakdown, we know that we have several components within the module, which includes our concepts, our engineering challenges, as well as the end of module assessment. Each module will have an end of module assessment, okay? Your engineering challenge cannot be skipped because your challenge is going to tie in with your end of module assessment. Everything that the students are learning within the module will be now processed and tested and communicated during this challenge. So it's very imperative that students are looking at the full module in entirety because there's going to be information from the end of module assessment that covers all aspects of that module, including, of course, our standards. Okay, so as we think about the next component, which is our concepts will have lesson sets. And remember the lesson sets, how we could think about it, it's just a cluster of lessons put together. And then now we're talking about how the lessons make up the lesson sets. So lesson sets are made up of individual lessons, pretty much. In the video, it did highlight this if you did not get an opportunity to record it. But keep in mind when we talk about our daily lesson planning, our daily teaching time for science, that in our lower grades, we're only allocating, based off of PhD science, 35 minutes to teach this lesson. And then for our upper grades, they'll have about 45 minutes to teach the lesson. So there might be some room for opportunity, depending on your campus dynamic, to either, if you have a block that's longer than 45 minutes, you would have to make sure that you're customizing to meet the needs of that longer block. If you don't have a longer block, then just keep in mind that these are the timestamps, if they're following it with fidelity, how long it would take them to teach that lesson. Okay, and then this was what I was referencing earlier, is that your spotlight lessons are still considered to be lessons within your module, but they're going to have specific standards that are solely found only in the spotlight lessons. Not necessarily saying that it's going to be spiraled throughout that module within the other lessons. It's only going to be housed in these particular sections. So it's very important for you to take a look at the standards that are going to be presented into your module overview and identify where to find those standards. And if it's coming from the spotlight lessons, how is it presented to students? So your spotlight lessons, they're included in some modules, but not all modules have spotlight lessons. So we may find one in module 1, but we won't see another spotlight lesson in module 2 or 3, depending on the grade level. Okay. And then, of course, our spotlight lessons, they pretty much entail our end of module and our science engineering practices. So Every module has an end of module assessment. You will also see how the spotlight lessons tie into that end of module assessment. And so when we go into our modeling questioning structure, we talked about the different components of the overview, right? So our big picture of having module, lesson sets, and lessons. I want to talk about the questions that are found in each of those components. Within a module, remember we have our anchoring phenomenon, which is the big picture question that students cannot answer until they've experienced every individual lesson. That is your big essential question, okay? And the goal is by the end of that module, students can answer this, but we can't expect them to answer that on day one, lesson one. Within the concept, they have focus questions. And within individual lessons, they have phenomenon questions. So if I was to translate this, this is what you find in your day-to-day lessons. This is what you find in the overall concept. And remember, a concept could have as many as 16 lessons in a concept. And then this is going to be found in your big picture overview of your module. And so ideally, they're all connected, but we can't answer this until we master our individual questions that lead up to the concept and then ultimately connects to the module question. And so what we're going to take a look at from the lens of third grade is a video that teachers could also start the year off by looking at their grade level specific. And I'll tell you exactly where to find it on the support center. You will be able to see, okay, introducing science to third, fourth, fifth grade. I would have my teachers look at this just to kind of see the big picture if they're not familiar with the program in itself. And so it gives them an opportunity to take a look at what does this module entails, what is the expectation of us launching this to students, what are students going to learn within their grade level. So it's just a good preview of the resources that are available for teachers. And as you go to this site, you see that there is an introducing PhD science to each grade level. So this could be an opportunity for teachers to highlight the specific grade level that they're focusing on. And it gives them an idea of that particular module. So we'll take
PhD Science Texas for Level 3. PhD Science Texas appeals to students' curiosity about their world by grounding deep science content in compelling, knowledge-rich phenomena and engaging experiences. PhD Science Texas inspires students to wonder about the world and empowers them to make sense of it. The 3 Level 3 modules span a range of topics, from Earth changes to survival and change to forces in motion. Throughout each module, students engage in hands-on investigations, read knowledge-building core texts, and observe works of art to support their sense-making in science. They use the scientific and engineering practices to investigate key science concepts and make connections across recurring themes and concepts, while building knowledge and skills along the way. The journey begins in Module 1 with Earth Changes, with spotlight lessons on changes in matter. In the Earth Changes module, students explore the anchor phenomenon, the transformation of Surtsey, an island that formed from an underwater volcano and then changed dramatically over the next several decades. As students learn and discover, they consider this essential question: how can the island of Surtsey change shape over time? To answer the essential question, students explore 3 overarching concepts. First, they investigate their own local land samples and observe maps and photographs to describe the composition and shape of land. Students then use models to understand how wind and water can change the shape of land. Finally, students compare volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tornadoes, and floods to realize that land can change over a range of timescales, from seconds to many lifetimes. In Module 1, students use scientific and engineering practices to investigate the following science concepts: matter and its properties, and Earth and space. As they investigate these concepts, students make connections across recurring themes and concepts such as patterns, cause and effect, scale proportion and quantity, systems, as well as energy and matter, and stability and change. In the spotlight lessons on changes in matter, students build an understanding about how the recycling process uses the properties of matter to conserve natural resources. As they explore changes in matter, students use scientific and engineering practices to investigate the following science concepts: matter and its properties, and earth, and space. They make connections across recurring themes and concepts such as patterns, cause and effect, systems, and stability and change. Module 2 provides further knowledge building opportunities for students to extend what they learned in Module 1. In Module 2, Butterfly Survival inspires the study of survival and change. Please note that there are no spotlight lessons for Module 2. As students explore this phenomenon, they work to answer this essential question about butterfly survival. How do butterflies survive over time in a changing environment? To answer the essential question, students explore 3 overarching concepts. First, they examine fossil evidence to gain insight into past environments and their inhabitants. Then they conduct investigations and analyze data to understand what makes an organism suitable to a particular environment. Finally, students learn that when environmental conditions change, some organisms thrive while others move away or die. With this knowledge, students realize that butterflies have characteristics that help them survive in changing environments over many millions of years. In Module 2, students use scientific and engineering practices to investigate the following science concepts: Earth and space, and organisms and environments. They make connections across recurring themes and concepts such as patterns, cause and effect, scale, proportion and quantity, systems, as well as energy and matter, structure and function, and stability and change. Module 3 provides students further knowledge building opportunities to extend what they learned in Modules 1 and 2. In Module 3, students explore forces and motion with spotlight lessons on the solar system. The anchor phenomenon engages students to explore motion in space by examining how objects move in space. As Level 3 students explore patterns of motion on Earth, they are guided by this essential question: why do objects move differently in space than they do on Earth? To answer the essential question, students explore 3 overarching concepts. First, students investigate the motion of objects on Earth, from soccer balls to spinning tops, to identify patterns and make predictions. Next, they explore what can change the motion of an object. They watch what happens when they exert different forces on an object, and they discover that those forces determine the object's motion. They also find that some forces, such as magnetism, electricity, and gravity, can act from a distance. By the end of the module, students are able to use their knowledge of motion on Earth to understand why motion is different in space. In Module 3, students use scientific and engineering practices to investigate the following science concepts: matter and its properties, and force, motion, and energy. As they investigate these concepts, students make connections across recurring themes and concepts such as patterns, cause and effect, scale, proportion, and quantity, as well as systems, energy and matter, structure and function, and stability and change.
All right, so hopefully this just gives you like a preview of what the year looks like. It's like a year at a glance in the video version. Just kind of front loading what each module is, what the anchoring phenomenon would be, also known as the essential question for teachers. So it kind of just gives them a preview of what they're looking for. And so this could be something that would be helpful just starting the year off, just for them to preview what is an overview of each individual module and what the students' outcomes should look like. So when we think about the navigation aspect of it, I want us to spend a few minutes to just explore the platform. I know I had an opportunity to share some major components with you, but it's nothing like learning and doing it yourself. So if you take a look, you feel free to take a picture. There is the login information for the demo account, as well as the password that's available. In your participant guide, there is a scavenger hunt that goes along with this digital platform. And there's 4 or 5 questions that we want to have some time to answer today as you are exploring the platform. And then at any point, if you have questions, I can come to you, or I can even display it on the board. Since it's such a small group, we can go through and just kind of talk about where to find those components. So if you're looking at your participant guide, I'll give you an opportunity first to log in before I start discussing some of the questions that are presented to you. We're going to take a look at these 5 questions. Okay, so as it says here on the bottom of the second page of the scavenger hunt, we will identify what information is found within the module map. We will also identify what is the importance of reviewing the module map prior to instruction. We're going to find out the difference between the anchoring phenomenon and the focus question. I want you to locate the two. Where can we find those? And then where can I find the phenomenon question? And we're really leveraging finding the questions because we know that's the driving of the instruction. We want students to be able to answer the phenomenon question, and we're always kind of correlating that with the big picture of that anchoring phenomenon. So we want to make sure that teachers are aware to, one, know that there are a difference between those, and also to where to find it within the platform. And so the last one is where to find the Appendix A, and then what information can be found there. So we're just going to give you about 20 minutes to explore, and then feel free. I have the platform up and visible, so if there's any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Also, keep in mind that this one right here, Level 3 overview, is an overview for the whole grade level. When you want to talk about the individual module, you want to click on one of those images, and you want to select the overview here because there's a difference between the two overviews. One is the grade level overview, and one is a module overview. So I'm just going to speak to more so this checklist here, since there was no specific questions that you had in terms of navigating. This is just the big takeaway, is that all of these bullets are found within the module map. And that's why it's so important for teachers to start with the module overview, because it really gives them all the information that they know or need to know as it relates to each individual lesson within that module. So it gives them the big idea. So we had our anchoring phenomenon, which is a module term. Our concept, our focus standard, which is just the TEKS or the standards that we're addressing, will be found in our module map. And then we also will have our focus question that can be found within our module map as well. And when we go into our module, we click overview, and this is where the module map is housed. Okay, and then the next one is going to be our phenomenon question. Just remember that our phenomenon question is day to day. Okay, that's the main understanding, is just if we could walk away today knowing that our anchor phenomenon is module, our focus question is concept, and our phenomenon question is lesson. Those are probably the big three takeaways from just internalizing the types of questions that PhD has for us. And we did have an opportunity to take a look at the learning cycle and then the anchor visuals. Briefly, this is just a preview. And we will take a look a little bit more specifically about those anchor visuals, and I will have an opportunity for us to annotate that within our participant guide as well. It's going to be found in, yes, Canvas, and then your digital resources, and then it'll be housed in Clever when the updates are made. You should be able to access it next week without having any issues with the new platform. If you log into Clever and you go into its Great Minds, because it's not going to be housed in anything in the science area, you do want to go into Great Minds, which is probably going to be under the math section because it correlates with Eureka Math. But if you log into Clever and you go into PhD Science and it says in sync, then you have the old resource, you have the old platform. So I just want you to be aware of that, because if you see that word in sync, then you need to probably just reach out to your IT specialist or your technology liaison. All right, so now we've only previewed the digital resource, right? So we're going to take a deeper dive into the actual internalization of it. So where we found the module map, we're going to take a few minutes to just read over the module map in reference to our PhD Science protocol as it relates to internalization. So I'm going to give you each a document, and today we're only previewing learning. Okay, because this is a 3-hour session versus our 6-hour session where we did the full internalization. You're going to just get a snapshot of this process. So as we take a look at step one, we do want to make sure our teachers are starting off the year with just knowing what the module entails. So in your document where it says module study protocols, we're only going to be in the purple section where it says preview the learning, and we're going to take a look at some of the action items. The action item for the very first one is going to just read the module overview. And so when you go into your digital platform, you will have to locate your module map again, and then from there is where we're going to just read over what this module entails. I also have our 3rd grade teacher edition. If you want to take a look at it from the hard copy view, if you find page 5, you will see that you will have your module map and you can read over, you'll be able to read over the module as well. Okay, so we're just going to give about maybe 8 to 9 minutes to just read over the document. So as we are previewing, as you get to the module map, as we are doing just step 1, previewing the learning, we really just want to be able to read over the module overview with the lens of understanding what is the scientific understanding that students really have to have or develop in order to be successful throughout this module. So thinking about what the essential question is and how does it build upon itself as I'm going from lesson 1 all the way to possibly lesson 21. So just kind of giving an understanding of the connection between these particular components of our lesson. Question A is, what scientific understanding do students build by studying, anchoring, and supporting phenomenon? And then there's 2 additional questions in that particular section, which is how do the focus questions work together to build the coherent understanding of the essential question? And then how does the exploring of the phenomenon questions help students answer the focus question? So they can keep that in the back of their mind as they are looking at those particular components within that module map. What we're going to do is talk about just the overall structure of building out a preview of the module overview in more of an internalization process. So once teachers have read this, what can we do with this information is what we want teachers to take away from it. So some of this key information from the module map we want to extract or take away is understanding what the anchoring phenomenon is. That's the first thing that teachers should have been able to identify within that module map. Then from there, they're honing in on what the concept 1 is. Remember, there's more than one concept within a module. It typically ranges from 2 to 4 concepts. And then identifying the focus question that correlates with that concept. On the other part, as it relates to the right side of this screen, we want to make sure that teachers understand the phenomenon question. And remember, our phenomenon question is our daily question, okay? And this particular phenomenon question is going to cover or be covered in lesson 1 and 2. So although it is our daily question, remember earlier I mentioned that sometimes it takes more than one lesson to get to that question or to get to the answer of that question. So keeping that in mind, it's not always going to change from day to day, but you will see a phenomenon question on a daily basis. Okay. This is probably the heart of where we want teachers to extract because it really paints the roadmap of where they're going within that module. And so what I want us to do is I want us to think about, 1, what information we can pull from the module map, and then we're going to create our own tree map to hone in on the various components within this module. So we're going to kind of do a deep dive internalization by extracting some of the information from this particular module to make it a little bit user-friendly for teachers to digest. Okay, so one thing is, I have the hard copy books that you can always reference. We're going to build it out together, looking at the very first component, and then I'm going to have you all kind of team up and build out your own grade level module questioning structure. So if you take a look at the left side where my anchor chart is, it really is painting out a roadmap. And this is something that could be done in PLC before you even launch your first module, because it really breaks down, okay, what am I teaching? So we know that this particular module is dealing with earth changes. So we should be able to identify all of the standards that falls under earth and space in this category, specifically earth. And so from there, I have an idea of what my anchoring phenomenon is. This whole module is going to be talking about the transformation of Surtsey Island. So it really paints a picture of what teachers should be able to understand, as well as how they should be able to facilitate that learning for students. And then I will be able to preview that I have 3 concepts. Now, I already kind of front load this information, but how would I know how many concepts I have? How would teachers find that information? Module map, yep, module map. And that's going to be our go-to when it comes down to this particular section. Everything that we're going to really pull from is going to be from that module map, or is going to be from one more section, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And so as we think about it, I want us to see if we can engage in a sticky note. There's some sticky notes in that toolkit. If I could have one person just write down, what is the concept one, using your module map. If I can have one person write the name of the concept one and one person write the focus question of concept one. And we'll just work together. Let me see if I have any extra sticky notes. You don't mind doing the concept question? The focus question for concept one. So what did we get for our concept one? What was the title of our concept?
The composition and land shape.
Yes, very good. Thank you so much. I'm going to take that from you. And then our focus question, remember our focus question goes with the concept.
What is happening to Cersei Island? To the island of Cersei? Did I do that right? No?
Okay, very close. Our concept one focus.
See, then I mean, okay. Because I thought so you're saying, you said concept or lesson one? I'm confused.
Concept. So this is the concept title, and
Okay,
this is
so
the
how do we
the
describe?
focus question.
All right.
So this is going to be all found within our concept. And we're just working together. We're practicing here. And so the concept title is the composition and shape of land. And the concept question is also known as our focus question, is how can we describe land? Now, we're moving on to more specific where it talks about the phenomenon, the lesson set, and the phenomenon question. So the phenomenon question is when we talk about our daily, you had the phenomenon question already, when we talk about our daily questions. So if I'm taking a look at the very first one, is they want us to identify the phenomenon title. And so the phenomenon title is not going to be a question, it's just going to be the name of that phenomenon. And for this one, it's going to be the transformation of Cersei. That's the name of the phenomenon that we're going to experience in concept one, lesson one. What's the phenomenon question?
What's happening to the island of Cersei?
That's the phenomenon question. And then the second part that we're going to even dissect more is the lesson set. So how many lessons are going to be found within this particular phenomenon title? Two. So we have lesson 1 and 2. So I will identify this component on the board. So we have the transformation, of Cersei Island is the name. Within the lesson set, remember our set is the cluster of lessons. So we said that we had 2 lessons, so we have lesson 1 and 2. And then you already had our phenomenon question, if I could take that sticky note from you. We have what is happening to the island of Cersei. That's the phenomenon question. We're going to continue this pattern until we fill out everything that falls into concept 1. And the reason why is we can see the connection of all the phenomenon questions along the way. So we've already did lesson set 1 and 2. Let's see if we can do the same thing for our next lesson. So we know that we have to find something that along the lines of lesson set 3 and 4. Or if I move to the next page, I see my next set of lessons is going to be 3 and 4. What is the name of the phenomenon? What's the title? Land. And that includes, and then do we have a phenomenon question? What is land made of? All right. right, so now can we go to our next one, which would include lesson set 5 and 6. What did we get for the title of this lesson? Landforms. We have lesson 5 and 6, and then we have a phenomenon question. And so what we'll do is we're going to continue on. We have lesson 7. What do we have for the phenomenon name?
The composition and shaping.
Yes. What will be our phenomenon question for lesson 7?
How can we describe Xerxes' land?
Xerxes' land. Okay. So we have just built out all the way from lesson 1 to lesson 7, and that takes place all under concept 1. Because as I take a look at the next page, we're now going into lesson 8 and 9, but it's no longer part of concept 1. We would build out into concept 2. So as I'm looking back on these phenomenon questions, it gives me just a blueprint of, okay, what is the phenomenon statement that we're looking at? And then how are these questions interconnecting with our overall focus question, which ultimately should tie into our essential question. So all of these should help students by the end of lesson 7, they should be able to answer this focus question, is how can we describe land? And each individual lesson, we're going back to this particular question in itself. As I build out my tree map to conclude concept 2 and 3, by the end of the lesson 21, 22, I should be able to answer my overall essential question, also known as our anchoring phenomenon. Okay. So we're going to work together to build out the rest of this concept 1, 2, and 3 that falls under module 1. Okay, so hopefully we had a flow already. You guys gave me a lot of information as it relates to the other 4 lessons. I would like for maybe one person to take concept 2, and then the other person will take concept 3. Or we can just collaborate and work all together. And ideally, by the end of today, we would already have built out grade 3 year at a glance. Okay. So what we're going to do next is take a look at concept 2. And as I'm looking at concept 2, tell me, once you find it, just give me a thumbs up or I found it, okay? And so if I can have someone, you can do it on sticky notes, if I can have someone identify the very first phenomenon title and question for lesson set 8 and 9. And you have that's the focus question. And then we also will have a concept title as well. All right, so as of now, we have the concept title is the changing shape of land, and then our focus question is how can land change? So now I'll give you about 5 minutes to see if we can have, is it Miss D? If Miss D, if you can take, I'm going to just divide it up a little bit. If I can have you take all the way to lesson 12, and then if I can have Miss Scurry take lesson 13 and then the engineering challenge. Same concept. Remember earlier we talked about how the engineering challenge should still be taught because it has some of our standards that will be found in the end of module assessment. And what I'll do is go ahead, as you're recording this, I'll go ahead and build out your lesson set. You have your phenomenon question, 8 through 12. And we'll talk about it once everybody is done.
And 14 through 18 is the engineering challenge.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. 14 through 18. Thank you. So we could do a recap real quick of concept 2, and as we build it out, we just want to keep in the back of our head how we are looking at these phenomenon questions and how they could possibly build upon each other in order to answer the overarching essential question. So just to kind of recap, thank you so much for your collaboration. We have our concept 2 is going to be the changing shape of land. Our overall focus question for concept 2 is how can land change? In the first 4 lessons in Concept 2, it's all dealing with wind and land interaction. So that is going to be something that students should be able to master in lessons 8 through 12, is understanding the relationship or the interaction of wind and land. And the phenomenon question is going to continue for those 4 lessons from 8 to 12. They're going to identify how can wind affect land. Then they transition for 1 lesson to this question, which is, how has Surtsey Island changed? And that's going to be in lesson 13. So hopefully as they identify the interaction of wind, they're going to see that how wind has impacted the overall shape of the island. And then during the engineering challenge, we have how can the slow changes of the land, I'll read it from the book. I know you said that you had to abbreviate a little bit. How can the slow changes of the land of the Motok Point to protect the Motok Point Lighthouse? So therefore, they're going to be able to specifically focus on the structure of the lighthouse as it relates to the slow changes of the land in that particular engineering challenge, which will take them through about 4 lessons. So now we're going to kind of do the same thing for concept 3. If I can have someone, maybe Miss D, if you can do the concept 3 title and focus question. Concept 3. Time scales of changes of land, and then how long do these changes to land take? Very good. All right, so what we're going to do is now break it down into our overall lesson. So here in concept 3, I see that we're going to start at lesson 19. And it looks like we're going to conclude in lesson 25 with the end of module assessment. So we do want to include the end of module assessment as part of our framework as we're mapping out all the components of our module. So if I can have a volunteer who could take maybe lessons 19 through 21, and then someone can take 22 through 25. 19, 20, and 21. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we have the rest of our module completed. And so as we are providing an overview for teachers, this is a way that they can see a snapshot of the module in its full entirety. You'll be able to see that not only when I hit question number, or lesson set number 22 going into my end of module assessment, the phenomenon question is, how can the island of Surtsey change shape over time? And if you see, that's the same question that we have in the essential question. So ultimately, by the end of our lesson set from 22, we should be able to go back, and now we're pulling in some of that scaffolding opportunities for them to be successful in the overall essential question with that module. So it really gives them a roadmap to see where we're going. Okay, so we'll be able to identify how many lessons am I teaching this particular phenomenon question, and then you can also see if there's anything that I need to possibly embed in terms of terminology. Earlier when we did the lesson progression with the standards, we noticed that in 3rd grade it's speaking to rapid changes. So when we talk about the lesson progression throughout this particular module, we need to make sure that students are being able to see how changes in 3rd grade specifically are rapid changing. Now, when we think about the overall lesson in itself, we need to be able to see if there's ways that I can make sure I'm incorporating that vocabulary along the way. So this is something that we can definitely do with teachers just to kind of preview where we're going within that module. Is there any questions? How do we feel about our comfort level now that we were able to dissect that full module and just identifying the overall arching of questions that phenomenon that PhD science has to offer? Remember, there's 3 main questions that students are going to answer throughout that particular time with PhD science, which is your anchoring phenomenon, also known as your essential question, your focus question for the concept, and then your phenomenon question for each daily lesson. And this just gives them a preview of pulling it out of that module map, a little bit more digestible. So let's reflect just at the work that we've done together and think about just the importance of internalizing a module before the instruction. So we read over the module overview. We were able to kind of just build out a tree map framework. What is the importance of doing this work for teachers prior to teaching the lesson?
I mean, I think it helps them understand, like, we talk about the term coherent and like how the concepts link together from the first lesson all the way to the end to show how the students are going to be able to answer that essential question and do the assessment, because you want them to be able to, you want alignment between what they're supposed to be able to do and then what the assessment wants them to be able to do. So looking at this whole process, like, now I understand the essential question and the focus question and the phenomenon. Like, I get it now. Before I was just trying to make connections and I couldn't until I saw it.
Visually see it, yeah. And that's speaking to PhD science. It's all about coherence. And I feel like once you really map out this module, you can see the coherence within just the phenomenon questions of how it builds upon each other and then how we're ultimately trying to answer the big umbrella, which is your anchoring phenomenon question. So definitely great insight on that. Did you have any additional or anything to?
It just helps you to understand it a little bit better when it comes down to switching your brain. For me, switching my brain from my old vocabulary to this new vocabulary, because like I said earlier, it's the same information, just new words. But also, it's important to internalize it beforehand so that you're familiar with what you're teaching and you understand any of the misconceptions that's going to come up or that possibly will come up. Identifying the time, like, do I need to spend 15 minutes on this? Do they already have it? Did they get it yesterday? You know, it just helps to understand. Internalize, it just helps you to move a lot smoother with it, in my opinion. Yeah. Because they could have gotten the concept yesterday, and it's just kind of reiterating it today as you're moving through the lessons, with lesson 1, 2, 3, 4. And I can say, okay, well, you know what? I don't have to spend as much time on this. They got it. We can touch it, and then we can move on, because we do only have 3 days of science.
That's true. That's true. And then it really, I feel like it puts the intentionality behind it. Like, what's the focus question? Even more now, I have a reason to reflect it back to my focus, my phenomenon question to my focus question, and make those connections interchangeably, and making sure that students are on track with hitting that end goal.
I would even introduce the previous focus question from the day before as a do now for the next day, just so that I can make sure that I'm triggering those thoughts. Okay, this was a question I asked y'all yesterday at the end. Do you remember? Tell me what you learned or what it was.
Yes, and PhD science will have a driving board question that I'm going to bring up a little bit later, where it's really making sure that students are always reflecting back on the previous day learning. Specifically, it could be the phenomenon question, or it could just be questions that they have throughout the lesson that we want to make sure that we're honing into, because it could support answering that overall phenomenon question. Okay, so we had an opportunity to preview the learning, and so now what I want us to do is just, for the sake of time, we're not even going to carve out this much time to do it, but I do want to talk about the next step, because we know the importance of module internalization, and this is only going to be done 3 times a year, because ultimately once you create your your roadmap for teachers to identify. They don't have to come back to it as frequently. But what they will come back frequently to is going to be the lesson internalization. So if you take a look at the protocol, it is a two-part protocol. It has a module and lesson study protocol. And this document is found in your orange folder. And what we're going to do is take a few seconds to just locate the document, and then I am going to switch over to the digital platform. And we're only going to spend time on one lesson. So it gives you an opportunity to see, okay, what should teachers be able to or how should teachers be able to navigate the platform to internalize their daily lessons? And so it will put it into perspective a little bit better once we go into the platform. Before I dive into it, this is something that teachers can also do is they can build it out. And this is the same format as your template there. You have your lessons. Of course, some lessons or some concepts will have more than 4 lessons. Feel free to just add to the rows as you see fit. But we will have 6 lessons for this particular module. And then the very first one is going to be the first column on your paper. What questions are students exploring? So when they start going through the actual lesson internalization process, they should be able to answer this question for each individual lesson. What is the focus of this particular lesson? What should students be able to explore? How are they exploring it? What investigations are students going to be engaged in to successfully ultimately answer our phenomenon question along the way? The second column will talk about what activities. Are they analyzing pictures? Are they building a model? Are we doing some kind of hands-on recreation of a volcanic eruption? What activities or investigations do I need to prepare for in order for students to be able to be successful in lesson 1? And then what are students figuring out, as well as how does this learning connect with other learning? And so these are just some guiding questions as teachers are internalizing their day-to-day lessons of what is the outcome that students should have. And so what we're going to do is just spend some time together just working on lesson 1. So we're going to still go out of level 3, lesson 1, but I do want to spend some time with this particular page right here because it gives you or gives teachers an opportunity to know where to go. Because if you remember earlier, that module map and then the prepare section is extensive with information. So this just kind of front loads the time and being targeted of where I'm going in the platform to answer this question. So as you take a look at your very first section, which is your phenomenon question, anybody remember where we could find the phenomenon question? You can find your phenomenon question in the module map. You could also find it in the prepare section, and I will show that as well. But when you take a look at where you were earlier, when you helped me build out this, you will see that you will have your phenomenon question. So what we're going to do is we're going to work through lesson 1 together, especially since it's a small group, we can just talk through it a little bit. So your phenomenon question as I go into lesson 1, what would it be for us?
What is happening to the island of Circe?
Yes, what is happening to the islands of Circe? So that's something that we've already grasped earlier. Now we're just going to hone in a little bit more specific with writing that down for lesson 1, question 1. So now that we're in the lesson, we can go into our lesson pages. And so when we're on the digital platform, okay, so once I'm in the actual module, I am going to go to this drop-down arrow on the right-hand side, and it's going to bring me to the prepare section, and then I see lesson 1 and lesson 2. Remember, the prepare section will give you an overview of these 2 lessons together. So it's kind of like the cluster. So if I was to click here, I would learn everything I needed to get an overview for lesson 1 and 2. That's what the prepare section is, just to kind of reiterate that. It really helps identifying just a cluster of what the standards are, materials, and resources. And this is another area where I can find my phenomenon question. So that's a helpful link. But for today, we're going to work on only lesson 1. But I did want to make sure I highlighted where you can utilize the prepare section. Another aspect of the platform is if you take a look at lesson 1 and 2, it will tell you some of the standout activities or PhD resources that you need. For instance, lesson 2, I see that I'm going to use an anchor model and a driving question board. So teachers will have to really prepare for that aspect. So when we reference lesson pages, I'm going to now just click on one lesson, which is the first one. And to answer that question, I can reference the agenda. It gives me a snapshot of what students are going to do. We know we're going to define land. We're going to even explore natural features of local land. So it's going to be more than likely photographs and observations that students are going to make. And this is where I'm going to really have to kind of provide a preview for the teachers here. I'm going to give an opportunity for them to know what resources we're going to use. This is what we talked about earlier with the student handbook. It gives you the photographs that they will reference within their classroom. So when we talk about what activities are they going to do, they're going to be making observations of photographs related to Searcy Island. That's one investigation or activity that they'll be doing throughout their lesson. As I scroll through, I will have maybe 4 or 5 minutes for you all to just read over this particular lesson. We see that we're going to have a noticing and wondering. So students are going to draw conclusions throughout this lesson. And we see that that is going to be a checking for understanding as well at the end of this lesson. And I do want to highlight that the checking for understanding is always open-ended. So it's not going to be anything, it's more like a formative assessment. Students will be able to have a productive assessment, performance assessment, where they're either communicating their ideas, they're drawing an illustration, they're recording their thoughts, and the teacher will have to evaluate that based off of their own rubric to identify if they were on target or not. I'll give you just a few seconds to think about this particular section, which is going to be what activities or investigations are students engaging in. So I kind of spoke to the second column and the third column, where it's mentioning how do we check for understanding during this lesson, and this is going to be the checking for understanding here in lesson 1. So students will view a series of aerial images of the Searcy Island from 1962 to 2016, and then they'll make and record their observation, and then you can identify some of the next steps as it relates to students being able to make the observation of those particular islands. And we're going to save that last column for us to come back together as a whole group, because there's some areas that I wanted to speak to as it relates to that last question where it says, how does learning connect with other learning? And so there's going to be some resources that we can bring in to support that part of the internalization process. So let's come back together and talk about the second column. The second column is mentioning what activities or investigations are students engaging in. Was there anything that stuck out to you, anything that you would like to highlight as it relates to this particular section?
Not this section. It's pretty straightforward. It just says define what land is or define land and then explore natural features of local land.
How would they be exploring it?
They're looking at, it says local land, but I don't know why it says local land. So like on the agenda it says local land, but on here it's aerial pictures of Searcy Island.
So through photographs, they need to leverage these pictures to be successful. So we need to make sure that when we are, planning for teachers, our teachers are going through that planning process, that they have access to make sure these copies are available for students. And so the investigation is really just through observation and exploring images of different parts of Searcy Island as it relates to the years. And so going into the third column where it says, how do we check for understanding during the lesson? And I spoke to that one already, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that section, but remember each lesson will have a check for understanding, and this is where you would be able to identify the formative assessment that students will be able to engage in during that lesson. So this is where we would go, as well as your land section. Remember, your land section is going to be another aspect of how teachers can identify the success of students in understanding that particular material. So those would be the two areas that I would possibly highlight for teachers when they're talking about evaluating student success. Is the checking for understanding, which is always identified with the purple box, and then the land portion of your lesson. And so those are the two main areas. And then when we talk about the last component, I do want to talk about our lead forward field guides and how we can possibly leverage some of those resources in identifying what are some prior knowledge that students will have going into this particular lesson. So we will come back to this last question when we go into our lead forward field guides and internalizing different components within that of how we can bring it into the internalization process. And ideally, we would want to do one of these for each of the lesson within concept one. But of course, it could be delivered in terms of bite size. So if I know that for week one, I'm only going to be focusing on lessons 1 and 2, or lessons 1, 2, and 3, then that would be something that I would just hone in on with my teachers to make sure that they're planning out, okay, what activities, what are students investigating, how am I checking for understanding, and then how do I know what is going to be some of the prior learning, or how can I connect the learning to previous learning? So how can I bridge the gap in that particular resource? So that is something that I would like for us to just kind of reflect back on, and then at the end of our session today, just thinking about some of the resources that are presented and how we can leverage them within our own PLC settings. So what is one key takeaway that you have as it relates to the learning progression chart or the lesson progressing chart? It could be a key takeaway, it could be a wondering or notice as well.
I guess I would probably, just a notice, I would probably move the check for understanding to first, just because this is from a teacher's perspective.
Okay.
And the check for understanding is kind of what drives the instruction. Do they know how to do, at the end they should know how to do this. So teachers, go ahead and take a look at it. Can you do this? And then what are the misconceptions that you came across when you were looking at it, and think about from a child's perspective before going into the explore and engage. That's what I would adjust.
Okay.
Just because.
In terms of backwards planning, that's how you could process that, starting with the end in mind.
Yeah, start with the end in mind.
With the check-in for understanding, then now, okay, let's see how that check-in for understanding correlates with the phenomenon question. I could see that process as well. Thank you. Well, keep in mind, it is adjustable, so you can cater it to how you feel is best in terms of delivering that to your teachers.
The way it's thought out is fine. It works well.
Great. And just remember that the main focus is for them to dig into the lesson. That's really what we want them to do, is dig into the lesson, know exactly the components of the lesson, and how does it connect to the phenomenon question. What activities are we utilizing within that day-to-day activity that supports the outcome of answering that phenomenon question? And if you feel like it doesn't support, what are some teacher moves or some administration support that we can have in order for students to be successful to answer that phenomenon question at the end of the lesson? And so when we think about our last column where we talked about how does it connect to learning, I want us to kind of speak to our lead forward field guides. And so we do have a copy of the lead forward field guides. If not, I also have it presented here. Keep in mind this one is updated to address the new standards. But when we talk about the TEAC scaffold, this is a great tool for teachers to understand, especially if they're new to a specific grade level. This might be their first year teaching third grade. They've been in first grade all of these years. This TEAC scaffold will help them understand how does it connect to other standards, or previous standards. So that if they're coming in from third grade, then more than likely we see that there should be a connection of 2.10a. And so that therefore it might provide some opportunities to have some talking points. It could also provide scaffolding opportunities for students to learn that particular aspect a little bit better. So this resource is something that I would lead with during my PLC time with teachers, because it really provides them an opportunity to see the connection of the learning from previous grade to previous grade. And I would start with that because in lesson 1, module 1, there's not a lot of prior learning because this is the first day of the lesson. So we would have to scaffold back into our previous grade level. But when we get into our module 2 and 3, we've can now answer this column a little bit successfully because now we have other connections within our grade level modules that we can pull from. Okay. And so another aspect of it is our instructional implications. So we know that when we talk about this particular standard that is presented in our modules, we want to make sure that we're front loading any learning from mistakes and instructional implications. What is this foundation and how does this foundation support student learning? And what information can I pull from this content that I need to specifically speak to for my students? So as simple as earlier, I need to make sure that during Module 1, Grade 3, I'm speaking to rapid changes at some point. If I'm seeing that's not one of the vocabulary words that are utilized, we want to make sure that we're doing that, because if we take a look at our Lead Forward field guides, we see that one is not only the vocabulary word, but it's blatantly stated within our standard of 3.10c. So when we talk about customization, I know that's a gray area in some cases, but we want to make sure that we are mindful of opportunities, and it could be just customizing in our vocabulary and how we're speaking and delivering it to the students. So for instance, when we talk about rapid changes, it is a light lift in terms of customization, but I know that I customize because the lesson didn't explicitly say rapid changes, but I can add that to the conversation as I'm talking. So that is a way that we can look at customization, but I do want us to talk about something that PhD Science has in particular that would be very helpful when we talk about engagement strategies and making sure that teachers and students are connecting to the material at hand. So one specific aspect, we talked about the Lead Forward field guides and really just kind of making sure that we're speaking to prior grade levels through this TEAK scaffold and learning from mistakes. But I want us to highlight the implementation guide from PhD Science. And inside your folder, I do have a copy. It was a copy for you all to share, but I have an additional copy as well. It was a table copy. This particular document, I said at the very beginning of our session, is a bundle. It's a lot of information. It's about 145 pages, but I really just pulled out 3 pages in particular that I wanted to speak to as it relates to making these lessons their own. One aspect in particular is the supporting scientific discourse, and this is really going to give teachers opportunity to have sentence stems or just increase their discourse within the class. How can I get my students talking about science? And so this particular section within the implementation guide will give them opportunities to ask posing questions. It will give them opportunities to structure or provide framework around the conversation of that particular content that they're delivering to the students. So that's something that they can keep in mind during their planning purposes. And maybe it's one grade level or one class period in particular that they're finding having some difficulties with talking about science in a way that needs to be done, so they can reference the implementation guide, specifically the supporting scientific discourse. The other one is the instructional resources or routines. And within that one is going to give them opportunities to support the engagement. Let's say that I'm always delivering the resource one particular way. Well, in this particular resource, it will give them some suggestions. So maybe we need to do a mix and mingle for this activity. Maybe we need to do a think, pair, share for this activity. It gives them a list of activities that they can do to really increase the engagement and just support the overall instructional and delivery practices of teachers. And then the last one is going to be probably the one that I want to spend the most time on. And so what you notice here is that you see that there's certain standards that are fully bold and there's certain standards that are partly bolded. Like you have a few words that are in bold and the other ones are not. This is probably going to be the driving force of your curriculum, because what happens is, let's take a look at the standard that we were looking at today, which is 3.10c. Let's see if we can find that one. It's completely bolded. So because it's completely bolded, what that means is that standard is going to be taught to its entirety, to its full capacity throughout third grade year. Okay, so students will be able to see by the time they leave third grade that that whole standard has been taught and addressed to them. But there's some standards that are not completely bolded. So it means one of two things. One, they're not going to see it within that calendar year in its full entirety. It may have been something that has been scaffolded from a previous grade level. So you may be able to go up or down in terms of if I'm third grade, maybe I need to go and look at a fourth grade standard because it may have been spiraled into one of the fourth grade modules. But it's going to be helpful for planning purposes to see that I didn't address a full standard based off of PhD science within that particular grade level and or module. So that's something just to be aware of when you're speaking to a standard. So thinking about opportunities for customization, if I see that, okay, in module 1, I have 90% of that standard bold, but I know that it does not become fully bolded at the end of third grade year, what can I do to adjust to make sure that that standard is fully addressed? Okay. And this is coming from the PhD science resources. So that's something that I would like for you to just be aware of during your planning purposes, because we do want to make sure that that standard is fully taught in its full capacity. Okay. And so when we think about those two resources together, using the lead forward field guides and then referencing that TEAC progression, we want to make sure that we're building a full, solid fidelity year of our resources. So those two resources in particular will help us with the customization that may need to be done as it relates to utilizing our PhD science. Okay. So when we think about our implementation guide and our lead forward field guides, when we support customization, I do kind of want to front load some of this because we talked about it a little bit, is that I would leverage my lead forward field guides just to get the background knowledge for teachers, understanding what the standard is, what are the components of the standard, the vocabulary, and then the learning from mistakes. What are the misconceptions that students will have? And then I will pair it with parts of my implementation guide to make sure that I'm incorporating my engagement strategies, instructional routines, and then making sure that that standard is fully taught within the calendar year. And so the last portion that I wanted to talk about is the visuals solely for PhD science. Remember earlier I talked about how PhD science has 3 visuals that you're going to see throughout your module. So as you explore the module map for each of those grade levels, you're going to see these 3 illustrations quite a bit. The very first one is the driving question board. And so what this particular one is for is to help guide the learning of students, because they're going to have questions throughout these lessons. And it's going to be the responsibility of the teachers to really help tap into answering these questions. So if you take a look at your participant guide a little bit more in specific, you're going to see the framework of how this the driving question board is divided into 2 sections. We see that on the left-hand side, we have the phenomenon question, and then on the right-hand side of the driving question board is going to be unanswered questions. And we know that students will not get the answer to all the questions that they have within a lesson. We're going to continue to just make sure that we're tapping into those resources as we teach these lessons from day to day. And as we're answering them, I can now take them off of the driving question board or provide a written statement to that answer. The next one is our anchor model. And our anchor model is going to be a visual representation. It's probably going to start off with just a picture, okay? And this picture is not drawn prior to the lesson. This is going to be drawn in real time with the teacher and student, and they're going to give them the students are going to give the teachers some opportunity to really help construct that picture. So what do we know about a volcanic structure? And the students will be able to say, okay, I know we have an opening at the top of the hill. It looks like there's going to be some kind of debris or smoke that will come out. So students are really going to really support with the construction of this picture. And over time, as they start learning more about what this visual is, they can start incorporating words or text to go along with the picture. What do we think this would be? This would be ash. This could be a rock. This is land. So we're now going to start labeling as the lesson progresses. And as we get to the very bottom, you see there's like a written statement here. This is going to be when the students have really hit the maximum capacity of that lesson. Like they really have a true understanding of what it is. Now we can provide some written text along the way. But the main idea for our anchor model is illustration. It should be a picture, okay, to support student learning. And then the last one is a little bit different from what we are known as anchor chart, because when we typically think about anchor charts, we're talking about the merging of a visual and written text. But for our anchor chart for PhD science, it's all written text. So this is going to be where the teacher stamps the learning. And this particular visual is broken up into two colors. And the top color is going to be students learning from the previous day. The color at the bottom, which is blue, is going to be students' new learning. So as the teacher is building upon each lesson, what do we remember about yesterday's lesson? Well, let's reflect back on our anchor chart that we developed together. And they would highlight some of the bullet points from the top section of the anchor chart. When they're going into the daily lesson, okay, let's think about our learning for today. What is something that we talked about as it relates to the changing shape of land? Okay, now they've been able to conduct the explore activity, and they have some statements of what they found out or they explored during the lesson, and the teacher can stamp that in written statement using the anchor chart. So that is really how they want us to leverage the anchor chart for PhD science, is we're building upon new learning each time that we come together with students. And then I kind of highlighted already the driving question board. It really provides students an opportunity to organize their concepts through forms of questioning from lesson to lesson. And we know that we have 3 different types of questions, from anchor question, focus question, phenomenon question. So this really organized our thought process for students so that they can visually see that we're working towards that big goal, which is answering that essential question. And for us to think about this one, I want us to look at our reflection question for today. Think about, how do students engage with anchor visuals? How do we want the students to engage with these models?
I guess the biggest point I got from it's an ongoing learning process. It's not something that the teacher drafts and just puts up in students. So it's a construction with the progression of their learning as they go. And so they're gradually adding information until it's a final learning product.
Yeah, learning tool.
That's it, a learning tool that students are actively engaged in, and they're part of the process. And we could see the development of it as we walk into their classrooms. We should be able to see how they were able to progress from, a few questions on the driving board question to really answering it at the end of that concept and or module. So this particular section here, I'm not going to have us build out anything because I do know that we are limited on time, but this is more so for teachers. And we want to make sure that you know that there is a template that PhD Science offers as it relates to the planning and development of their daily lesson plans. So we talked about how it's broken down into 3 particular categories, which is the launch, learn, and land. And we're going to close out. Thank you so much for your time. I do have an attendance survey, but before we leave, is there any questions that you have for me as it relates to the work that we did today? Now, PhD Science has a lot of resources, okay? So it's just really just digging into it and practicing along the way. I do want us to kind of just reflect on this last portion as we do our 1, 2, 3 reflection. And thinking about the last part of it is, what are 3 PhD Science resources that will support you in your journey as you leave out today? What are 3 resources that you would leverage in your delivery of PhD Science, are supporting the delivery of PhD Science?
You said resources?
Yes.
I think for me, the implementation guide is going to be one that I pull. And then the videos that just kind of help reiterate what I've learned here today.
Okay.
Be able to share with teachers.
Implementation guide, the videos, yes, and then also, if I could add to it, is this module internalization or this module protocol will help kind of support building out the framework of mapping out where we're going within that particular module for teachers to kind of get the big picture and hone in on that.